Good evening and welcome to the Fifth Estate. My name is LaShawn Anderson-Stewart and today's episode will be on wrongful convictions. Marshall, Mogart, Truscott, and Sofno. These names all represent painful reminders of the flaws within our justice system. All of these individuals were wrongfully convicted and spent countless years in prison for crimes they did not commit. The fact that wrongful convictions take place in our justice system is terrifying. But after all, the system is run by humans and they tend to make mistakes. What is even more terrifying is that some individuals are wrongfully convicted on purpose. When you have been charged, and even worse, convicted of a crime, and you feel confused, hopeless, and tired, what do you do then?
If I was wrongfully convicted, I would do everything I could to get it overturned, get a lot of lawyers, do a lot of research to prove my innocence.
I would make an appeal to try to get my conviction overturned.
Well, what could you do? I mean, you're convicted, you're in jail, there's no one there to help you, everyone thinks you're wrong. I don't think I would really do anything.
I would place my faith in Canada's judicial system.
I would talk to my friends and family and try to get an appeal.
If I was wrongfully convicted and knew that I was innocent, besides getting a hard-working legal team to build a strong case in my defense, I would also raise awareness about the injustice surrounding my case on social media to force the criminal justice system to take accountability for their behavior.
Tammy Marquardt. This is her story. Tammy Marquardt was born in Toronto, Ontario. Her father was Aboriginal and her mother was European. Tammy was only raised by her mother, living in a basement apartment for quite some time. Life was a struggle with poverty for her family. Throughout her teen years, Tammy experienced sexual abuse at the hands of her mother's boyfriend. Due to unsuitable living conditions, she left home at the very young age of 17 years old. She lived in shelters and at her friends' homes when they would have her. Shortly after leaving home, Tammy met her boyfriend, Robert Nelson, and in the summer of 1990, Tammy found out that she was pregnant with her boyfriend's child. This caused her to drop out of school. On May 18, 1991, 19-year-old Tammy welcomed her first child, Kenneth Wayne, into the world. Sadly, her relationship with Robert did not last. Tammy was alone once again. She was still young and lacked the love and support she needed for herself and for her baby. Just before Kenneth's second birthday, Tammy married Rick Marquardt. Unfortunately, the history of being abused continued for her, as Rick was abusive to both herself and to her baby. Tammy had frequent contact with the Children's Aid Society, although her child was never taken from her. When Tammy's living situation became unsustainable, she willingly put Kenneth into Children's Aid Society's care for 3 months so she could protect him. Kenneth suffered from a number of serious health issues, including asthma, pneumonia, and epilepsy. Due to several severe health conditions, Kenneth experienced frequent and extremely severe seizures, resulting in hospitalization several times over the course of his short life. October 9, 1993 started like any other day. Tammy woke up at 7:30 a.m. with Kenneth. The weather called for rain that day, so Tammy stayed home with her son watching cartoons and playing games. After waking up from a nap in the afternoon, Tammy headed to the spare bedroom to check on 2.5-year-old Kenneth, who was napping as well. She thought she had heard him calling her. When she got to the bedroom, she found the baby rolled up in bedding, gasping for breath. She tried unsuccessfully to free him before calling the ambulance. Just calm down. Oh my God! Ambulance for which town? Oshawa. Okay. But he's not breathing. We'll go in the front door. Side door. Hurry, he's not breathing. Who's not breathing? My son. Ma'am, give him CPR. Do you understand what I'm asking? I can't give him CPR. I can't. I don't know how. I've forgotten. Calm down and listen to my instructions. I can't. 5 minutes later, the ambulance was at her door. The efforts of the paramedics to revive Kenneth at the apartment had failed. They took Kenneth to Oshawa General Hospital. Later that evening, he was transferred to Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, where he was revived, but sadly the doctors determined that he had suffered too much brain damage. 3 days later, Kenneth was declared brain dead and taken off life support. He was then pronounced dead. The stated cause of death was lack of oxygen and blood flow to the brain. Tammy was numbed by the events. She was unsure of what to feel. No child should die before his or her parents, but death is not foreseen. We all know we will die someday. However, we are not really prepared for it. Was this death of an otherwise healthy child? This would be the question as the drama unfolded. Tammy had just lost her baby boy. She didn't think her life could get any worse, but she was wrong. A few weeks after Kenneth's death, Tammy found herself back at the hospital. This time is because she tried to hurt herself. The hospital tried admitting her, but her boyfriend Rick acted out quickly and took her home. The hospital reported the missing patient to the police. Shortly after, the police showed up at her home. This set Tammy off once again. She got hysterical in front of them, and every action of hers worked against her. She had risen their suspicions. The authorities believed that Kenneth had been murdered, and Tammy was their prime suspect. In 1993, Charles Smith was considered to be the leading expert in Canada on criminally suspicious pediatric deaths. He was the director of the Ontario Pediatric Forensic Pathology Unit at Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto and frequently lectured on pediatric forensic pathology to Crown Counsel, police officers, and coroners. Smith performed the Kenneth's autopsy. He concluded that Kenneth's death was not accidental and that it was actually caused through smothering and strangulation. The authorities had suggested that Tammy had smothered her son in a moment of frustration. Subsequently, on November 23, 1993, less than 2 months after losing Kenneth, Tammy was charged and arrested for second-degree murder of her son. While waiting for her case to come up for trial, she became pregnant. On August 1994, Tammy gave birth to Keith, but as soon as she gave birth, the Children's Aid Society took Keith away from her. There seemed no end to the pain Tammy had to endure. As the trial date approached in 1995, Keith's father, Rick Marquardt, disappeared from her life. Tammy became pregnant for the 3rd time. Before the trial, the Crown prosecutor offered Tammy a plea bargain. They wanted Tammy to plead guilty in exchange for her sentence to be reduced to 5 years. The 2 lawyers representing Tammy did not agree on her odds. They believed there was not enough proof to get Tammy convicted. Tammy turned down the offer. Tammy was tried before Judge McIsaac and a jury in Whitby, Ontario. The prosecutor's case was based on 2 main theories. The first one focused on Tammy's lifestyle. She was financially and emotionally strained. She was young and lacked the coping skills needed to raise a small child, especially one with health problems. Tammy's marriage was unstable. Her husband was abusive. The prosecutor tried to show how a stressed-out woman like Tammy could easily lose it and strangle her child. The second theory was based on the opinion of the expert Dr. Charles Smith. Dr. Smith believed that Kenneth had been smothered. He did not believe that his death was caused by seizure. Tammy testified in her own defense and maintained her innocence. The defense argued that Kenneth had died during an epileptic seizure, but they called no medical expert of their own to support this theory. The jury accepted the Crown's theory, and on October 24, 1995, Tammy was convicted of Kenneth's murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 10 years. Tammy appealed her conviction to the Ontario Court of Appeal. On January 22, 1998, her appeal was dismissed by a unanimous court. Since Legal Aid Ontario refused to provide her with further funding, she was not able to make an application for leave to apply to the Supreme Court of Canada. Tammy had officially lost her son and her case. In 1991, concerns were voiced in regards to Smith's testimonies in many cases. That year, trial judge Justice Dunn acquitted a 12-year-old girl who had been charged with manslaughter following the death of a 16-month-old child she was babysitting. Justice Dunn was critical of Smith's evidence, methodology, and conclusions. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, Smith continued to gain negative attention.
Pathologist whose autopsy results are at the center of a public inquiry gets his chance to explain himself today. Dr. Charles Smith made mistakes in almost half the cases he investigated between 1991 and 2001. And some of those errors led to false accusations and criminal convictions. The CBC's Neil Coxall is outside the inquiry and joins us now live. Neil?
Good morning, Suhana. Well, hours and hours of testimony, more than 40 witnesses here at this inquiry. But really, Dr. Charles Smith is the witness for this inquiry, certainly.
Tammy applied to AIDWIC, also known as the Association in Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted, and currently known as Innocence Canada, for help with her case. In April 2005, AIDWIC wrote to Dr. Barry McLellan, who was the chief coroner for Ontario at the time, and Michael Bryant, the Attorney General at the time, urging a full public inquiry into Smith's work. In October 2007, a press release that a formal review would be conducted of criminally suspicious child deaths for which Smith had performed the autopsy. By this time, Tammy had spent over a decade in prison. As part of the chief coroner's review, a broader inquiry into pediatric forensic pathology in Ontario, commonly referred to as the Gouge Inquiry, was taking place. In his October 2007 report to the chief coroner, it was concluded that Smith's findings were illogical and completely against scientific evidence-based reasoning. Later at the Gouge Inquiry, a doctor testified that the evidence that Smith had given at Tammy's preliminary inquiry and trial was unprofessional and misleading.
Okay, so that's our focus tonight, the shocking case of a Toronto pathologist whose testimony sent a number of people to prison. How did it happen? What safeguards should be in place to make sure it never happens again? He's asked, how would you describe your training in forensic pediatric pathology? And he said it was self-taught, it was minimal, and retrospectively, it was hopefully inadequate. And that is very scary. And that's what people should understand when you're looking at this case, to look beyond Dr. Smith and look beyond what was happening in the system.
On April 30th, 2009, the Supreme Court of Canada issued an order to send the case to the Court of Appeal for Ontario for consideration of the fresh evidence and determination of whether Tammy's conviction constituted a miscarriage of justice. This process took 2 years, but on June 7, 2011, the Ontario Court of Appeal quashed her conviction and ordered that a new trial commence on February 10, 2012. Before the new trial could begin, however, the Crown withdrew the charges against Tammy since there was no doubt based on the fresh medical evidence provided by experts. Double-sided and I just can't hide. I kinda like it when I make you cry, 'cause I'm twisted up inside my mind.
Cool.
Welcome back. You have now heard about Tammy's case. Now let's take it back to the roots of the case. Why exactly was Tammy Marquardt convicted of a crime she never committed? I mean, convicted of a crime that never even took place. Let's take a look. The prosecutor saw Tammy as a young poor mother with no support systems who had difficulty taking care of her child. She had an unfortunate past, being involved with Children's Aid Society, being in and out of the hospital at times due to her son's terrible health conditions, and being in an abusive relationship. This made her an easy target. Police saw these signs, and when they got the autopsy reports back, they were certain Tammy murdered her son. So they pointed the fingers at her, not considering any other possible options for who committed the crime or how it happened. Tammy sat through the trial with a sinking heart. It was very hard to hear her character being criticized. The Crown focused on Tammy's actions and behavior. Her demeanor was used to portray her as a potential killer. Society often judges a person based on their outward appearance of their actions, but we all express our feelings differently. For example, some people cry when they are sad, others seem calm. No one can know for sure what another person is feeling or thinking simply by looking at them. The jury heard a considerable amount of evidence regarding Tammy's demeanor at the hospital, Kenneth's funeral, and upon her arrest. If this unreliable evidence were led at a trial today, it would be likely ruled inadmissible. While the trial judge instructed the jury not to place any weight on this evidence concerning the appropriateness of Tammy's emotional reaction, the fact is that they heard countless witnesses recount on how innocent, grieving mothers should act to losing their child. Tammy's two lawyers could not decide on whether she should have taken the Crown's plea bargain. They gave her minimal and confusing advice that in the end left her to make the decision all on her own. As well as we can't forget the fact that Tammy's defense lawyers did not call its own medical expert witness to testify at trial in support of their theory that Kenneth had died as a result of an epileptic seizure. The leading cause to Tammy's wrongful conviction was the evidence of Charles Smith. As Commissioner Gouge put it, Smith had neither formal forensic pathology training nor board certification in that field. In short, he was a pediatric pathologist, not a forensic pathologist. In addition to being unqualified to do autopsy work, on which he spent so much time, Smith was a terrible expert witness. He constantly gave misleading statements and at times told outright lies on the witness stand. The reader is encouraged to view Commissioner Gouge's report in its entirety. If not for Charles Smith, it is unlikely that Tammy would have spent 14 years in prison for a crime that never happened. The Gouge Commission found the actual words "think dirty" in instructions from Ontario's chief coroner to pathologists, police chiefs, and other coroners in 1995. At the time, there was reason to fear that some cases of children being murdered were being missed, and sometimes classified as sudden infant death syndrome. That's a category for deaths when the cause can't otherwise be determined. In order to stop this, Jim Young, chief coroner, issued a new procedure for pathologists to use. The details are as follows. Unfortunately, in this day and age, child abuse is a real issue, and it is extremely important that all members of the investigative team think dirty. Sadly, the thinking dirty approach has caused pathologists and prosecutors to often ignore other reasons why children may have died.
Took away a big portion of my life, took away my life with my children, took away my ability to grieve, my freedom, my mentality. It really took a big chunk of my soul.
How do you deal with that day to day now?
Well, with the love of my friends and family.
I see your tattoo says freedom. Does it mean more today than it did when you first got it?
Definitely. Now it's true freedom.
Well, there you have it, the ins and outs of Tammy Marquardt's case and why she was wrongfully convicted. Unfortunately, Tammy's case is only one of hundreds or maybe thousands of people who are waiting for their truth to be revealed. It is very important that we continue to educate ourselves and one another about the injustices and flaws within our justice system. That's all I have for tonight, folks. Thanks for tuning into the Fifth Estate.